welcome to our fourth edition of the Everybody Hurts podcast. I'm really excited this evening for a couple of reasons. One is I've got my voice, which I haven't had for the last three. And secondly, we've got a guest today of Darren Southam from the East of England Ambulance Service. I'll just let the rest of the crew introduce themselves, starting with Chris.
Hi there, I'm Chris Puddy, part of the Fountain Therapy team. I work as a personal trainer trying to blend the personal training aspects with mental health to achieve overall wellness. I'll pass you over to Monica.
Hello, my name is Monica Varo and I'm a hypnotherapist and I'm psychotherapist, lucid dreaming facilitator, and I'm part of the Fountain Therapy team.
Hi, I'm Phil Wayne. I'm finally back in the studio as opposed to Penzance, psychotherapist and part of the Fountain group as well.
And I'm Stephen Bell, also from Fountain Therapy, and I work with resilience coaching and some therapists, and I'm also studying to be a counsellor. And I'll let Darren now introduce himself as well.
I'm Darren Southam. I'm a senior paramedic and second in charge on the HEART team, hazardous area response team for the East of England Ambulance Service, and I've been with them for the last 17 years.
Thank you, Darren. Obviously, the reason we've got you in today is we want to discuss stress in the workplace, and in particular for the emergency services. We plan to do a whole series with the emergency services with police and fire, and you are the first guest. So we're going to be talking about stress in the workplace from your point of view and just initial causes and effects. So tonight we'll try and stick with the causes, I suppose, of stress. If you want to give us a brief rundown of any causes, that'd be great.
I think generally, as we were alluding to a little bit earlier, the main cause for stress within certainly the ambulance service isn't necessarily the jobs that people go out to. It's the stresses of the job itself. We all do 12-hour shifts, which inevitably aren't 12-hour shifts. They normally go over to 14 hours quite regularly, which has an impact on people's tiredness, their ability to do the job, family life. There are obviously incidents that we will attend that will have stresses related to them. Personally, and I think probably the majority of most of the emergency services, that would include anything to do with children. But I think other people's perspective of what would stress us out, i.e. the big, gory, traumatic jobs, probably aren't so much. It can be quite often some of the benign incidents that people don't expect to catch them out, and either through tiredness, other stress levels, personal experiences, it can catch you off guard, and I think that's what can affect a lot of people more often than not.
Right.
Sorry, Darren, just on that one, you mentioned a very good point there, and we're talking about stress, and you said it's those big incidents. Would I be right in assuming, and I know I shouldn't assume, but would I be right in thinking that typically with most emergency services in those types of scenario, it's those big jobs that automatically support's fired in? Now, that certainly it would be my experience from our policing backgrounds. I don't know if you could agree with that, Steve, but that was my experience, that any big job, automatically there's debrief processes. Let's get people in, let's talk through it and work back and go through the steps and make sure we've got the process that's all nailed down. With the little incidents, how much emphasis is put on making sure people are all right?
That is quite different from area to area, and a lot of that will come down to the local management team being aware of the job, and then being able to speak to those members of staff. Again, with your sort of previous background, back in the day when things were a little quieter, you had a lot of peer-to-peer support. So you had some downtime after most jobs so that you could discuss it with your colleagues. Nowadays, they're so busy, we generally don't get that opportunity. So with the littler jobs, that can be quite often missed. You're right, with the big incidents, as a team leader, I will always do a hot debrief straight after the incident, and I will try and involve all three emergency services within that. And our control rooms will generally put people forward for a TRIM referral straight away. We have TRIM practitioners that are available, and that's immediately generated following any big incident. But you're right, littler ones, quite often that can be missed.
Because I think back to, I had the pleasure of working with you over at North Watford when you were based out of there, and I was based in the traffic unit. And it always occurred to me that, particularly it struck me that you'd have a big job or even a smaller job, but you'd come back and you'd be isolated and alone. Now, I understand, obviously, with a lot of the paramedic crews, they're double crewed. But for the first response paramedics that are more often than not single crewed, what's there for them?
Not a lot. Again, it comes down to the local management. If they're aware of the job, for them to go and make sure that they're okay. a lot of the control room staff, if they know that you've got a solo responder and the job looks as though it might be something that could affect people, a lot of them are very good nowadays of making contact to make sure. Other than that, it's down to the individual to sort of seek help if they think they need it. Again, I was lucky on the car being based at North Watford, so there was generally police officers around, so I could discuss and talk to them. Other people that are on solo responders don't have that opportunity. They're in a hut somewhere on their own, completely isolated. So the ethos now within the ambulance service certainly has moved forward. It was highlighted that there was a lack in support for staff through certain jobs. That has been highlighted. There's been incidents that have made that be highlighted, and people are getting better. It's not perfect, but at least things are changing, and lessons have been learned from previous errors, if you like.
Just from my point of view, a couple of things. Obviously, Monica, for one, probably doesn't know what TRIM is, and nor does some of our listeners. Just from your point of view, Darren, do you want to just explain
So
what that
it's a trauma risk management service that I think all 3 emergency services have. So members of staff, peers, go on a training course, and there is a set criteria, if you like, sort of a checklist. So a conversation is had normally through work time. They're stood down from duties to be able to do it, and it's based on a scoring system. And if you score, personally, I've been lucky enough not to have to go through one, but if you score over whatever the cut-off mark is, there's certain avenues that those TRIM assessors can put you through to get help, support, counselling, anything that can help to put you get through whatever the issue is at the time. It's compulsory. It's not compulsory. It's completely voluntarily. Any job that is of a bigger nature will automatically generate the assessment request, but it's down to the individual whether they wish to go through the process or not.
I know that the Hearts Police use that TRIM assessment as well. Normally there's an initial assessment and then there's a follow-up assessment, and then as a result of that follow-up assessment they then decide a path of care going forward.
I think unless there is obvious red flags from the initial one, obviously if that occurs then it's dealt with immediately, but I think you're right, if there's no massive red flags, it's done.
But the TRIM professionals or the TRIM assessors are just colleagues, they're not necessarily...
No, they're other paramedics, they're other peers, or they don't even actually have to be paramedics, they could be technicians or emergency care assistants. Your clinical grade is irrelevant in that sense. They go on a specific course for it, they are regularly updated within that course, and they're available through normally through our control room, emergency operations centre. The referral goes through. It's completely anonymous as well, so none of the management team are aware of it. But the referral's put through, and then, as I say, it's voluntary whether or not you wish to take that option up.
Darren, well, thanks. When we explain it's anonymous, but usually being a colleague that comes in, is it a bit like for yourselves in the ambulance service that when a colleague comes in to speak to another officer, it's usually quite obvious to the rest of the team that they're having a TRIM assessment?
I think that's the difficult point, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's done whilst on duty. So it tries to lessen the obviousness of it. If you wish to do it in your own time and away from work completely, once the referral's put through, the assessor, so there's a number of them in each area, they are contacted. The contact is then made between the assessor and the individual. So I think if that was the option that you wanted, to keep it completely anonymous and away from work, you can have that discussion directly.
What do you think of the culture within the ambulance service? Are people willing to open up?
That is an incredibly good question. I think more so now. As I say, I've been in the job for 17 years, and I don't think that was the case for a large percentage of those years. And I think the stigma was you were weak, or there was a weakness if you did say you needed help. Thankfully, I think that stigma is slowly going away, and I think the types of incidents that we are going out to on a more regular basis, people are more open to the fact that everyone has their toll and there is no shame in getting help, and actually if you want to last in this job a long time, sometimes you need it.
It's a very interesting trend. I mean, I was only talking to Phil just before we went on air, and we were talking about the nature of people within these services will seek help outside for fear that they're going to have, a black mark upon their name.
again, I think certainly from my exposure within the ambulance service and working on the hazardous area response team, there are staff at the moment that are off with stress-related injuries, PTSD for one of them, and there is no stigma whatsoever. We are very lucky in the unit that I work on. We're slightly different from the frontline crew, so we're always a team of 6. So we have that peer-to-peer support as well, unlike the frontline crews. We aren't as busy. We're busy, but not as busy as the frontline crew. So we do get the time in between jobs. We cover a vast area, so we can travel miles from where we're based in Melbourne, just outside of Cambridge. We cover as far north as Norfolk and Suffolk and Great Yarmouth, and as far south as Watford. So we will quite often stop for the debrief, for the peer-to-peer conversation straight after a job. Having spoken to people that I still know on normal frontline, it is better. People are becoming more open to the fact that there is no shame, that help is there, and that it's needed to last in this job, both physically and mentally. And I think slowly it's chipping away. It's not happening as quickly as it probably should do, but I think that's historically, there's been so many years where that stigma's been put on wrongly. It takes time to break that away, but I think it's happening slowly but surely.
The last couple of days I've been with a couple of fire officers, or firefighters I think we now call them, and one of them was in Grenfell, and what he actually said was he went for some assessments. It was above a fire station. Everyone knew he was in there. He couldn't really relax the whole time, and I just wondered what the benefit of any services you have. Do you have anything that can take you away from the service completely?
So we have the employee assistance program as well, which is completely external. It's an external company from the ambulance service. That's one of the things that the trim assessors can put you forward to. You can self-refer to that by email or by phone, and that is completely outside of work. So they have no understanding, no knowledge, no involvement in it whatsoever.
You have to excuse my ignorance. I know there was employee assistance program around before. I don't know that much about it. Are you able to just explain what the employee assistance program is?
So it's an external company that people can contact that can offer a wide variety of assistance, from things like work-life balance, relationships, general health and well-being, can go through debt, general illnesses, anxiety and depression, stress. They will be able to put you on to the right people. So they won't necessarily have the staff that do it, but they're kind of like a filter system, a broker, if you like, that if you need depression, they can put you through to a counsellor, or debt, they can put you through to a financial advisor. So they're more of a centralised hub, completely outside of the ambulance service, and they can put you on the right pathway.
And is that a safe passage in terms of that? No matter what happens there, it won't be fed back. So if they needed more therapy, more counselling?
As far as I know, and again, I've never had to go through it, but as far as I understand, it's completely separate from work altogether.
Okay.
Phil, can you see any problem with this, the fact that there isn't anything internal or as such that's immediate?
I mean, the trim system was first devised in the military, and it was devised for people that were kind of living together, fighting together, and a way of flagging up if someone was struggling, so they could find a safe way of preserving all their safety. And so the trim assessment, I know in Herts Police hasn't been as successful as you seem to suggest it's been in the ambulance and paramedics, because I know that just a couple of years ago, over half the officers were offered it, and less than 1% took up that offer. And so in fact that the stigma that I've encountered working with the police of admitting that there's a problem seems to be huge.
I think that was still in existence with the ambulance service, and it is very slowly starting to get better. But you're right, there is still that stigma with a lot of people.
Yeah.
But it's getting better.
That is one of the big areas I've particularly noticed, having left the police service, and I'm sure we've spoken about it before, Steve, that people are coming out of the woodwork and contacting me because I become a safe pair of ears, someone safe to talk to, because I'm no longer in the police. There's no fear that, where's that going to lead to?
And because you really associate with that and you really understand.
Yeah, and sometimes people, from my experience, actually want to leave all the work issues within work and just take it somewhere else so they don't have to think about it.
See, I think personally, from experiences that I have had, the peer-to-peer side of things works certainly with our side of things, because they are other clinicians. So a lot of the stresses related to incidents themselves is whether I've done the right thing. And for me, whenever I've done a job, all I want to know is, could anybody have done anything different or better? And if the answer is no, I can come to terms with that, because unfortunately the outcome is always going to be what the outcome it is. As long as I've done the best that I can, I couldn't affect that. Now, going to a counsellor or an external unit for assistance in that sense, personally, I don't think they'd help me, because they haven't got that clinical training and understanding to answer those questions.
No.
But that's only me personally. And in the 17 years, I've always done that as a peer-to-peer counselling session, if you like, sitting around the table with a cup of coffee with my colleagues, and you can trust what they say, because most of them, we're pretty honest in the ambulance service, and if they think you've done something wrong...
But that's from the practical point of view. How about the emotional side?
Personally, I can deal with the emotional side as long as I know I've not done anything wrong.
But
if I've done everything right, I can't affect what that outcome is going to be. And I think I'm lucky that I can have that view. If I've done something wrong, then that's where the emotion would hit me, because if I hadn't have done it wrong, could the outcome have been different, if that makes sense?
I think you summed that up perfectly from my perspective with a cup of tea. When you talk about that, you're having that cup of tea. And if I think back to, and it's not just fire, it's not just police, it's not just ambulance, it's everything combined. And there was a culture a number of years ago where, certainly when I came into the service, we still had bars in police stations. We still had socials. We still, people would get together. They'd play a game of pool after.
We'd go out.
We'd go out. We'd do things.
As police and ambulance.
Police and ambulance. We combined, and there was no approved structure. It's just what you did, because there was an emphasis on this welfare support, and sometimes it's that nipping in the bud straight away.
Yeah.
Cut it off before it becomes an issue. And you have that conversation over a pint, over a cup of tea, over a game of pool.
But key to what you're saying, Chris, is that knowing people who know your culture, knowing people who understand your work ethic, knowing people who understand the complications are going to be easier to talk to. And the reason people are approaching you now is quite simply because they know you've been in the job.
Yep.
And so I know of officers who are privately accessing healthcare, mental health care, because they're too afraid to go through the proper procedures. And yet you're discovering that people are coming out of the woodwork saying, help, I need someone to talk to. And I think that's part of the problem. Although we're seeing barriers break down, possibly, clearly there's, when you look at the surveys that were done in Ireland with the Garda Police and in Manchester, between 20 and 25% of officers are either diagnosed with PTSD or at risk of having it.
I think it's unfortunately it's a reflection of today's times that it is just the tip of the iceberg. Everything else that goes below, I'd be intrigued to see the amount of people that self-report with a back injury or a head cold, when the reality is because they don't want it reflected on their record for that it's anything to do with any aspects of mental health, burnout, overwhelm, anxiety, depression. Therefore, from their perspective, it's much easier to say, well, I've pulled my back, or I've got a sniffle.
It's fear of being labelled all the time and living with that, and you're in a box then, oh, he's depressed, he can't cope with the pressure, or anxious, or so on.
So Darren,
it's a very lonely place to be, I assume.
You seem to have some resilience there, that you said you're able to build yourself up, accept it. Can you see any difference in the new staff, or is there any sense, is there an age issue? Or?
I think so. I mean, when I joined, you had to be 21 to join the service. Right. And even then, I think in some instances that was probably too young. Now you can join at 19 straight from university, and I definitely think that's too young. From without tarring everybody with the same brush, there's obviously exceptions to the rule.
Yeah.
Excuse me, but I don't think at 19 I would have been mature enough as an individual to go out and deal with some of the things that we have to go out and deal with. You come out now as a qualified paramedic. When I joined, you started as a technician and you learnt your trade with another qualified paramedic. Nowadays, you can come out as a brand new qualified paramedic with somebody that's still doing their training. That's an additional stress and pressure, because you're still learning to do the job yourself, yet you're responsible for somebody else. But we need 400 members of staff every year. They need to get numbers through. I'm not saying it's right, but that's the way that it is. I think the police are the same. They're bringing new people in so quickly. I think you're going to find a lot more burnout with those us old dinosaurs, as a lot of the new ones like to call us, have built that resilience up by doing the job, feet on the ground and working up. These new guys are thrown in straight at the deep end. I do worry for them 5, 10, maybe years down the line as to how they're going to cope with it.
Yeah, I think it's very similar in the police, and new people are teaching new people now. I mean, when I left, the most junior person was 3 years on my team teaching people with 3 years service.
That's the big thing, though, isn't it? When I joined the team, and you were my sergeant, and it's resilience. The resilience you build up, it's earned. It's not given.
Agreed.
And it takes time. It took time to build up that resilience, and you learn from those people around you. So it's not that I wouldn't necessarily know how to make the right decision, but you want someone next to you to ratify the things you're doing, to give you that confidence. And it slowly you build your confidence and you build your resilience, and it's through having like-minded individuals around you that know what you've been through or are going through, and you learn from their experiences, you learn from their techniques, what worked for them, what hasn't worked for them.
But it's things like when, unfortunately we have to break some very sad, bad news to people. At 19, I don't know if I don't think I would have been emotionally strong enough or had the right vocabulary to have spoken to a 70, 80-year-old person that's lost their loved one because we've been unsuccessful in resuscitation. Now these 19-year-olds are expected to be put front and centre and having to do that. And I think that's unfair on them, and it's unfair on the people that they're having to do it to. But I don't know what the answer is. That's the culture at the moment.
Part of the resilience you're talking about that you've built up are the more senior officers. And so in the police, the inspectors, chief inspectors have got that resilience because they've been there a lot longer, and yet they're dealing with a team of youngsters. And so when you, as a young person, go to your boss, some of them are not quite so understanding of your situation because they will say, well, I went through it and I've got my... But the young person hasn't. And so you're seeing...
They haven't got any life experience to go on as well, let alone just within the job, but just previous to life experience on top of that.
Very recently I was in a station and I'd noticed an officer just walking on their beat. And I came to the station and I said to the sergeant, that person needs to be seen. They said, why? I said, they just look out of it. And eventually she said to me, well, actually, they witnessed their first suicide a few days ago. And this guy wasn't coping. But he was walking out on his beat looking like a zombie.
See, this is where hopefully now it's starting to be within the ambulance service that the local management team would see that. You look for the difference in that demeanour of that person. And it is sometimes obvious, sometimes it's not. People are very, very good and very clever at hiding things, certainly within our jobs, because you have to do that within your job. To members of the public. So you actually get very adept at doing it within your colleagues and peers as well. But I think people are getting better, and there's a lot of literature that the ambulance service put out now within sort of monthly bulletins of some of the trigger systems to look at in individuals. Have they become a little bit more introverted, quiet? Are they not so jokey? Are they constantly late for work? Do they disappear and you can't find them for periods of time? These things are being highlighted to us as members of staff, just to turn around and go, are you all right?
Yeah.
And don't actually take, yeah, I'm fine, mate, as the answer. Actually delve, because everyone will go, yeah, no, I'm grand. Are you really? Let's go and have a coffee. Let's go and have a cigarette. Well, I shouldn't say that as a paramedic in the NHS, but let's go and just have 10 minutes and say, really, are you?
Well, in this particular situation...
I'm really sorry, Phil. It's getting to the end of the time already.
Okay, well, just to say very, very quickly, in this situation, I passed this guy on his... He didn't know I'd seen him, and so he was just unguarded, and that's how I noticed it.
I'll tell you what we do. Next week we'll follow this up and talk more about those triggers that you mentioned, and maybe you can tell us a bit more of what happened with that incident there, that officer as well, Phil. Obviously, as we always say, we're not offering any medical advice today. We are literally just discussing the issues. But if anything has affected you today and you do need to speak to somebody, then obviously there are the Samaritans, or if you feel that you're at risk, then obviously you can ring 999. Or, as Darren and everyone has said here, speak to somebody that can help you.